Out. Okay, tonight we have a great session. We're going to be focusing on addressing the genomics of fear and anxiety. And we'll begin our time by asking Kashif, which we have the privilege of having today, who's the founder of the DNA company. And the company's actually motto is improving lives. Their success is based on improving lives. So Kashif, if we begin our time, how would you begin to answer the question, the value and the benefit of addressing the genomics regarding fear and anxiety? What can you help us better understand the help of that?
Here's a perfect example. I'm sitting in my car in a parking lot, where I'm supposed to be in a boardroom, properly addressing everybody here. And normally this would have somebody sweating, and the fear and anxiety would be kicking in hard. But because of my dopamine pathways and the way I deal with reward, and more importantly, COMT. So there's an enzyme called COMT, which clears neurochemicals, right? And for some people, like myself, I have an ultra fast version. And so it allows me to get past emotional stimuli very quickly, which in terms of things like fear and anxiety can be highly advantageous, right? Because I do feel and experience, just like everybody else, the same anxiety and fear, but it goes away almost as fast as I'm feeling it, right? If you have the ultra slow version, this one gene can all of a sudden cause you to get stuck in that mode and cause you to stay in it for, a much more a deleterious duration, which can be problematic, right? So now that's one small example of the neurochemical that makes you feel the way you feel. We don't even think about what's the duration of that feeling, right? Well, that one simple nuance can take it to, we both experience the same thing. We both reacted to the same degree, but one of us is stuck not being able to get over it. And that creates this either fear or anxiety response. Now you can look at it another way around. The actual intensity of the feeling. So there's genes that determine to what degree do you bind literally with receptors, the neurochemicals that make you feel that feeling. When it comes to, again, what we just went through, the stress response, the anxiety response, there's some people that bind a lot more. And so they're much more used to constantly having pleasantness around them, pleasure, everything is good. It's very easy for them to experience pleasure and reward. So it's common for them to feel good. So when you take the good away from them and give them a bad scenario, there's more of an acute crash, which, another person may not feel. So for them, bad news is it delivers, this, call it an acute anxiety response, where on that day it's horrible. Can't get out of bed, don't want to talk to anybody. This is taking over my life. Everything is bad. Then the opposite could be true. Somebody who feels something to a very slim, low level of intensity, again, genetically predeterminable, they're constantly teetering that line of, I don't really feel that great. Things don't give me reward. Things don't give me pleasure. I have to do more. I may often become addicted because I'm pursuing pleasure because I don't get enough. So they're used to not feeling good anyway. So when the bad thing happens, it's just another bad day. And so they don't get that crash, but they have a more ongoing chronic anxiety, which is the normal state for them. So even just taking those two little nuances of how long does it last and to what degree do you normally feel, then how do you respond to that anxiety or fear-inducing scenario, whatever you just finished going through, right? So we can keep going, and then there's a lot more we can talk about, but those are two very simple examples of how we can highly personalize how we experience these things, right?
Gotcha. Right. And then there's approaches that help, right?
Oh, for sure. So the whole point of personalization is, if you don't know what's truly wrong, you also don't truly know how to fix it. You end up in the norm, which is trial and error, one size fits all. This sounds like anxiety, so let's go deal with it with the way we normally deal with it. Maybe counseling, maybe medication. And if it doesn't work, then we have to try something else, and we have to try something else, and we have to try something else. And the place where you see that the most is in mental health, because there's nothing to measure. So when it comes to, cholesterolemia, cancer, etc., there's things that you can measure in the blood, and you know exactly what to target, what's wrong. When it comes to mental health, you don't even know how the person saying what's wrong is perceiving that moment. So as an example, the ADR2B gene determines to what degree do you experience and bind trauma, negative stimulus. So if you're that person who literally will bind or imprint trauma. So we both go through the same bad scenario. One of us goes through that same scenario again a month later, and it's as if something new happened. The other one is holding that grudge emotionally, and it's like, not this again. Oh, it's happening again. And you're starting off exactly where you left off last time. So if that's you, then you're the way you hold on to the negative emotion and experience that, you're coming from a very different perspective than the person who doesn't see it that way. They see it as an entirely new event. And so when a clinician is trying to coach that person, there's a big difference between life is horrible, I always feel bad, everything is bad, versus whatever happened a month ago, I don't even remember anymore emotionally. I may remember it intellectually, but not emotionally. So those two people see the world different. And so when you're talking to them, this is why, again, going back to how I started, mental health is hard to measure, because you're measuring what somebody is telling you, which is how they're perceiving it. And their perception may be the problem to begin with. So
right.
This is where, when we look into genetics, we truly understand how to measure, like what you can measure. What do you measure? We know these chemicals elicit certain feelings or certain emotions or certain irritability, or, call it procrastination or burnout, or all these various things we suffer from mentally. Here's the actual chemical that causes you to feel that. Here's the receptor that causes you to experience that. Here's the clearance enzyme or protein that gets rid of it. So in that map, you can truly understand how this person is experiencing the world. And all of a sudden, when you start to talk to them about what's going on, you can start to, not only for the benefit of the clinician, but also for the patient themselves, understand when they say 2 out of 10, is it really 8 out of 10? And when they say out of 10, is it really 2 out of 10? Is it their context that's causing the problem, or is it actually their hardwiring? Right? So you can really get personalized, get straight to the actual problem, and then know what to do. The trial and error is gone. You know precisely, with precision, exactly what the person needs.
Right. And say for the person to receive that awareness again, like how does that person really recognize those patterns there?
Yeah,
but not to get locked into them either. But how to, yeah.
Yeah, that's an important question, because we find that when we sit down with people and we're dealing with, whether it's mood and behavior or mental health issues, just the awareness of knowing that this is how I'm actually wired, and this is not an exaggeration, 50% of the problems go away. Why? Because up until then, you were blaming something externally and feeling that life was unfair, that there was a load, that there was a problem. When you start to understand that the thing actually isn't as bad as I thought it was, I'm just perceiving it differently than the people around me. That awareness in itself is a form of healing, right? It allows you to do better with everything. Then you can get down to, now that I know what triggers me, whether it's I feel it too much or I feel it for too long, whatever the problem may be, now you know what to work on, but you can actually work on it, versus the world is a problem, I'm perfect, right? A lot of people start there. Like, I have anxiety because work sucks. Well, maybe you have anxiety just because you're mismatched to your job. There may be something else going on.
Right. That's conscious health, right?
Yes. For sure.
Yes.
For sure. And that's
being aware.
Right.
So what would be helpful, like physiologically, taking like what a supplement help quicken a person's processing, or how would you address that? So is that in line with helping a person?
With settlements, you said?
With supplements or something, some support.
Yeah, so when it comes to sort of root cause medicine, which is, we're not trying to mask a symptom, we're not trying to make you not feel anxiety anymore, right? We're trying to understand, why do you describe something that sounds like anxiety? Because there's many, many different reasons. That it could be hormones, it could be vitamin D, it could be dopamine. There's many ways that will get you there, right? So it's first identifying that. Then when it comes to understanding root cause, which is, there's a certain version of a gene that I have that causes me to not do a function well. So a gene is an instruction telling your cells what to do. If you have a bad instruction, you're not doing that job properly, right? And that job being done poorly leads to this feeling that you have. So now there's 2 ways to deal with that. Like you said, okay, if you don't do the job well, let's supplement with something. It could be literally a supplement. It could be foods to alter gene expression to make you feel better, right? Or it could be reducing or removing the load. And a lot of people for whom mood and behavior or mental health is a problem, it's sort of call it a crutch that prevents them from getting ahead. Often context is what drives the change. Supplements are the acute response. Let's balance your chemicals out. But if you go back to the wrong context, you're just going to feel the same way again. And what do I mean by that? Take me as example. Ultra low dopamine, ultra fast clearance. So I feel things slim to none, and it lasts far too short. So I sound like a prime candidate for addiction because I don't get pleasure. And so when I finally feel the pleasure from something, I become addicted because I need more and I need more because my clearance is so fast. I'm not in it for long enough. And my profile does point to addiction, but I'm not an addict. It also points to depression, right? But like you could, if you don't feel and you don't enjoy the world like the people around you, you're going to be depressed because everything sucks. And in short, it just doesn't feel good, but I'm not depressed. Or dopamine also powers reward. It powers pleasure, but it also powers reward. It's the same neurochemical that allows you to feel both. So because at a young age, my father passed away and I became responsible for the family and I had to work, I went down the reward path. I started working and I started pursuing bigger and bigger things and taking risks and doing bigger things. So my context drove the outcome, which was if I perhaps grew up wealthy and I perhaps grew up with everything handed to me, then maybe I would have been depressed because there would have been no challenge to pursue. And there's too much good stuff around me anyway, so pleasure is too easy. Or if I grew up, with sort of less beneficial circumstances and I also didn't go down the reward route, maybe I would have become an addict because I would have tried to find pleasure in something and I would have become addicted to it because it's so hard to get that good feeling for me. So this is where understanding the neurochemicals will give you a profile. Here's who you are, right? And there's two ways to deal with whatever problem there may be. So the problem is what somebody comes in complaining about. I'm an addict. I don't know how to solve it. Okay, well, we know we need to switch your context while supporting you with the right supplements and everything else. And to give you an example, there was a research study that was done on mice where they were actually given illicit drugs and they became addicted to them, and intentionally they wanted them to become addicted so that they could understand how to sort of wind them off. And they were in a cage where all that was available to them was water and the drug, and they would drink and they would have the drug and they would have their food as well, right? But there was no other stimulus, there was no toys, nothing else. Then they attached the cage with community, so there was toys and then there were other mice that weren't addicts, and those addicted mice, they were no longer addicts because they then had another place to get pleasure from and a sense of community and another context, two separate cages, right? The other cage was a context of community and pleasure from that. And so the context changed the outcome.
That's a great example.
Yeah, and this applies to humans. It applies to me, right? Like I literally could have been any one of these three. So in short, there's two ways to resolve things. There's two dials you turn. If you don't do a genetic process well, you can take supplements or food or exercise that are known to increase capacity. Let's make that gene work harder. We know what affects gene expression, how hard the gene is working. Or maybe both, or you tune down the things that you're not designed to handle. If you're designed to be, a ballerina, you probably shouldn't be deadlifting 400 pounds. You're going to break something, right? So get rid of the problematic stuff in your life that you weren't designed for, which you may find out after understanding your genome.
How about like going back to our topic about anxiety, like the BDNF gene, like the relationship there with anxiety and mood and possibly fear?
Yeah, so BDNF drives neuroplasticity, so the actual ability for you to develop neural connections in your brain and build these highways that information flows through. So if you have the not so good version, a few things happen. It's harder for you to shift gears because you don't do a good job of developing new synapses and neural pathways to deliver information. So picture the scientist in the lab who, doesn't leave the lab till midnight. That's all they live and breathe. And if you ask them to speak about it or present about it, they can't. So I'm in the lab. That's all I do, because their neural pathway development is very difficult for them. versus the entrepreneur who wears 10 different hats. They're the speaker, the author, the accountant, the lawyer. They do everything, right? So for the person who has the not so good neural connection on BDF, what we call the AA version, um, that person gives things a lot more meaning. So when there's a problem, it's called the drama queen response. They're slamming doors, yelling, walking out of meetings. The world is over. So again, it comes down to perception. That something that to the rest of us didn't really mean that much, to them meant the entire world, because that's how their brain processes it. And the older they get, the more sort of matured those paths get, and they're not developing anymore. That's why you see some older people that can't learn new habits or are very set in their ways. I would argue if you test their BDNF that they have this profile, right? That they're
That's
further
true.
down that path.
And
Sorry?
yeah, the idea of this, if that's low, if a person's compromised that way, that can set the stage for a person to be anxious. Is that what you're saying too, to really round it out?
Extremely anxious, extremely risk adverse, extremely skeptical, extremely fearful. They may not say it outwardly. They're going to actually act the opposite. They're going to have an ego. They're going to dress immaculately. They're going to be careful about everything around them because it all matters to them. It all means so much. But inwardly, it's fear, anxiety, skepticism, sort of insecurity, all of those things.
Right.
Right. And now imagine what that person would struggle with.
Right. And as they're struggling, how, assisting that person out of that could be raising their BDNF element there.
Yep.
Either supplements help with that, but exercise helps with that.
There's multiple things, and it's so easy. That's the thing, is you don't need to take a medication, you don't need a surgery. It's so easy. There's certain supplements. We actually make a BDNF optimizer that just boosts your BDNF levels. It makes you feel better. What we tell people with low BDNF is you have to have a daily routine around your BDNF. So you start the day, you get in a hot shower. First thing you do. Why? Because that heat boosts your BDNF levels. Second thing, you're out in the sun and you're getting vitamin D, so that your the little BDNF you have is being optimized. Vitamin D is a cofactor to so many other problems. You have 22,000 genes in your body, 2,000 require vitamin D to function. So imagine how much is dependent on this one thing. Then you take your supplements, boost the BDNF levels, but during the day, you take breaks to do breathing exercises. Let's get you into deep breath, which also boosts BDNF levels. You also take a really high-grade omega-3 that boosts BDNF levels. In the evening, you go for a low-intensity exercise like a walk or yoga. It boosts BDNF levels. If you have access, you use a sauna or a hot tub. Get in that heat, boost your BDNF levels. And at the end of the day, you're a little bit more careful about things like blue light, pot lights, and overstimulation, because your BDNF also sets your circadian rhythm, that clock, and you're probably not doing such a good job, so you're not going to feel well, right?
So how about folks who've been on medications and they have an interest to maybe wean themselves off? Have you seen, looking at a person's genomics and addressing that accordingly, that persons have been able to do that?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I mean, first of all, I'm not a doctor, so just, legally, we don't say, hey, let's go get you off your drugs. I would bring a doctor in between to make sure that's done safely. And it is a weaning process, because if you're dependent on a drug, we don't want you to, often when you get off something like that, it's adverse, like it's problematic. So it's like those two dials again. Let's start boosting your ability to do this innately and internally yourself. Let's get you building up your BDNF levels, and then slowly you need less and less dose, and you start to feel better and better. And you it's a dual track that's parallel. And at the end of the day, the goal is, let's get you healthy, not in treatment. Let's get you off medication.
So it allows a process to be engaged with that has some sense to it and some direction with it, right?
For sure, yeah. If somebody like yourself who's brilliant in managing this kind of stuff, if you can work with somebody like yourself to do that, then all of a sudden that process, you have that quarterback to coach you through and keep things safe, right? And especially when it comes to mood and behavior issues, you want to be very careful about not pulling things out and pulling the plug. Go through that process, right?
Right. As a chiropractor, I'm not allowed, and that's out of the scope of my practice, but I do have practitioners in the area I can work with to help assist a person in that way.